Julie, you are on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, great to be here.
Oh, well, we are very happy to have you here. What do you want to talk to us about today?
Yeah, I myself am on the spectrum, and I would like to talk about growing up in the 90s as neurologically and sexually atypical. And by that I mean in the 90s, you know, there was no term, like the term autism meant those people who don't talk. And so there were certainly never things like Asperger's or Autism Spectrum. So I was just that weird kid. So on top of being, you know, that weird kid with no friends who got bullied all the time, I was that kid that didn't want to date. Now, I identify as demisexual, and had I known at least the term asexual in the 90s, it would have saved me a lot of headache, because back then, you know, there's the false dichotomy that if you're not heterosexual, well, of course you could be heterosexual and demisexual, but if you're not interested in dating boys, it must mean that you're in the closet. My mother thought that I was in the closet, and I am fortunate in that I grew up in a secular Jewish household, which meant we went to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we ate, you know, pepperoni pizza and things like that. So it wouldn't have been an issue. But the thing is, the only reason it even occurred to me to think that I might be gay is because people were putting it in my head. You know, the kids at school. Oh, you know, she doesn't like boys. She must like girls. And in the early 90s or mid 90s, if you weren't in, you know, like New York City or San Francisco, or I don't know, maybe even there too, so, you know, being thought of as gay, you might as well be saying I'm a leper.
Right.
So there was that. And what also was difficult was that my mother, in trying to figure things out, asked me these very invasive questions. Now, when you're a kid, you're not hearing, oh, my mother's concerned. You're hearing, why is she asking me all of these questions? Why does she want to know these things? And so I can give you one example. You know, being on the spectrum, we tend to get obsessed with things. When I was in my early teens, I was obsessed with the actor Alan Arkin, which I'll be amazed if you've even heard of him. But he was the
Little Miss Sunshine. I mean, a handful of great films.
Yeah. So in the early 90s, I was obsessed with him, but I didn't have a crush on him, though my mom was convinced I did. It was more like I saw him as a role model, and I wanted to grow up to be like him because he seemed like this, you know, very multifaceted, multi-talented guy. And I can remember one time we went out and rented movies back when that was a thing, and we brought home a couple Alan Arkin movies, and we're pulling into the garage, and my mother says, she's just joking around, she says, tonight we're going to watch a movie with Alan Arkin, sexy Alan Arkin. And then suddenly her tone totally changes from, you know, she's just being silly to being dead serious. She goes, Julie, what traits do you find attractive in boys? I was like, what? And I was like, I don't know. And that was my honest answer. I didn't know. It just wasn't on my plate. I told my father this story years later. He said that I should have told my mother, you have the subtlety of a hand grenade. But anyway, I didn't have my first crush until I was almost 15. And the number of people that I've been interested in, I can count on my fingers, and they've all been guys. But and I've only kissed one person. He knows who he is if he's listening, because he's the only one. And that was way, way back in 1999. And so that's kind of how I developed. But one thing that I also think is interesting that we should touch on, we all know that sex education in the United States sucks, but kids question it. They say, why are they telling us this? I know it's bullshit. I know that, you know, they're whatever. But if you're a kid who's A, on the spectrum, and B, not having sex on their radar, there's going to be no reason to question it. And by it, I mean things like don't have sex because AIDS, and the way they would paint like I didn't have abstinence-only education at school, but it wasn't comprehensive either. Like, they didn't explicitly say don't have sex till you're married, that's bad, but the emphasis was like towards abstinence. And in
it's
fact,
still
I can
very
remember,
sex negative, even if it, provides information. It's like, well, you probably shouldn't have sex. We don't recommend that you have sex, but I guess if you do, try not to screw it up.
Yeah, basically. And I can remember the middle school I went to, it was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and the high school was 10th, 11th, and 12th. When I was in 9th grade, they brought in three girls from the high school who were going to tell us why they were going to wait until they were married to have sex. And I remember this one girl saying, "It's a gift that I want to save for my husband." And this other girl showed us a picture of like a fetus, and she said, "This is what the baby looked like that my friend aborted." And again, I didn't question it. I just kind of got this image in my mind painted of like, people have sex before they're married, or like the equivalent of like these violent drug addicts. They're screwed up, they're messed up, they're gonna, and it was, and I know looking back that if I'd come to my parents about this, they would have said, "No, this is absolutely ridiculous. You're getting these weird messages," but no kid wants to talk about sex with their parents.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable enough as it is. You have all these concerns and frustrations, and then to bring them up to your folks? Yeah,
for reasons that are rooted in evolutionary psychology, the whole incest taboo. So the first time I got anything remotely comprehensive was when I went to summer camp. This was the summer of 1995. I was 14 years old, and we had a guy. His name is Scott Freed. He's HIV positive, and he's an activist. He's actually still alive, but back then HIV was, looking down the barrel of a gun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he told us, "I'm not telling you guys to have sex. I'm not telling you not to have sex. If you have sex, have safe sex." And he talked to us about condoms and making sure that you have a discussion like, have you been tested, and what did the test say, blah, blah, blah. And the first summer that he came, I thought, oh, my God, this guy is saying all these bad things. Then the following summer, when I was 15, he came again, and once again, I dismissed it in my mind as, oh, my God, he's saying all these bad things. Mm-hmm. But then something happened toward the end of the summer, and, God, it happened 22 years ago, but I still remember it like it happened last week. I was talking to some of my friends, and I was telling them about like how I learned what a blowjob was, and I say learned in scare quotes because when I was 11, I asked my mother what it was, and I kid you not, she told me it's when a woman kisses a man on his penis. Now, so of course, I'm just picturing somebody, pecking someone else on their penis. I'm not like imagining, someone sucking the guy off. So my friends all laughed, and I got really upset, and I got up and I stormed out, and they followed me. They said, "We're sorry. We didn't know this would upset you." And I was furious that like I had been given this vague description, and I went to one of my counselors, just about all these different things that had been, that I've been thinking about. And I sat down with her, and she said, "People don't wait till they're married. These schools, they feed you propaganda, blah, blah, blah." And I remember it was like this rude awakening. And I realized, it's kind of embarrassing looking back on it, but
that there was space to disagree with these things.
Yeah. And I remember thinking that the idea of having sex before you're married was like this radical fringe view. Like that was what it was in my mind. Mm-hmm. And I realized just in that moment that I would have to change my views. And I was angry for a very long time about this. Like I was angry for about, I'd say, a year and a half, 2 years, like that the world had essentially lied to me. Mm-hmm. And around that time, there were these commercials, these PSAs. You can actually find them on YouTube. And the tagline was, "You're worth waiting for." And first of all, like I said, I grew up in a secular household. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what the Christian right was. I thought religion meant, oh, this is the holiday you celebrate. This is the temple you go to, and being religious is like, do we keep kosher? Do we not keep kosher? That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know that these PSAs had a religious agenda behind them. And like there's one where it's called Sophomore Mom, and it's this girl, and she says, "I met this guy. I didn't say no. I have a baby, and I'm 15. And then like she goes, talking about how difficult it is. And at the end she says, "Waiting for the sitter to show up just so you can go to class. You know who doesn't show up? the guy who said he'd love me forever.
Yeah.
I should have told him no.
That's what sex is, right? It's teenage pregnancy. Yeah. The two are directly connected. I wanted to take a moment just to first say, it sounds like an incredible experience. But how significantly different would it have been if words like Asperger's, or now as we have a more developed understanding of autism spectrum disorder, or words like demisexual or asexual, and hearing you say all of that, that is why we do shows like this and we use these labels and we, offer people these definitions. I so often hear, why do we have to put a label on everything? Can't people just be who they are and do what they want to do? And, of course we support that. People should be who they are and do what they want to do. But that, finding your tribe, having these descriptors, recognizing that there are a ton of different ways to be and that there are probably people like you and this is how to find them. I mean, that's the value of vocabulary.
Yeah, we use it to identify certain traits or certain things in ourselves or others to be able to, like you said, find that tribe, find the others like you.
And to recognize that the thing that you are, the thing that you're doing or wanting or being is
okay.
Yeah, and it's not unique to you. I mean, every individual is a unique individual, but that their experiences are shared by others. And
that's right. And it's, sorry, go on.
Well, the other question I really had for you was, how do you feel like your experiences as somebody who's not neurotypical affected your understanding of sex ed, of communication with your parents? I mean, what did those things look like, and what do you wish you had known then? Certainly, I mean, you were a child, but with regards to your autism, how did that factor into those experiences?
Well, the thing is, the way I see it, if you're on the spectrum and you're not having a lot of friends, you're not going to have like friends who are talking to you and saying, "Oh God, I can't believe that teacher said that." My cousin, she has sex and she uses condoms and they work and whatever. Like I didn't have anybody to have this conversation. Yeah, so I had absolutely no point of reference by which to question what I was hearing. Now, had sex been something on my radar, that is certainly something I would have questioned, because I was questioning all sorts of things that even my brother, who was an atheist practically from the moment of conception, did not question. Like gender roles. I remember coming, like sometimes my mom would say, again, she was trying to prevent me from getting picked on at school, but she'd say, "Julie, don't tell jokes. It's not ladylike." And I'd, kind of like scouting To Kill a Mockingbird between Anne Alexandra and Atticus, like night and day. I would go to my dad and I would say, and again, this is not me looking back in retrospect, I said stuff when I was 11 or 12. I'd say, "Dad, Mom says because I don't have a penis, I shouldn't make jokes like this." Or it was just something very blunt. Like, I don't remember the exact words, but it was something to that effect. And I was thinking, I'm supposed to act a certain way because of parts that I have that I didn't ask to have or not have. That, that makes no sense. And of course now, like, people are finally saying what I was saying like 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of the beauty of what I'm going to very loosely call the Temple Grandin model or ideal, that folks with autism are not healthy people that just had one broken piece, that this is instead a completely just healthy and reasonable way to be, and that it's vital to our society and to our culture and our genetic experience. I'm not a geneticist, but there is value in having that form of diversity, and you point that out when you're talking about, somebody who's willing to just see through all of the bullshit and ask questions very directly and succinctly and not be encumbered by all of the social barriers and the things that go with that.
And I also want to say that there's a reason that we are using the term non-neurotypical now, because it does not make you in any way less broken and, anything negative. It's just there is what we would consider typical, and then there is something other than that. But as we're finding, the autism spectrum covers a wide range, and there are more people on that spectrum than originally thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Yeah, I was just going to say what I will say about that is, I and actually a lot of other people I know vehemently disagree with the whole, just taking out Asperger's from the DSM and putting autism spectrum disorder, whatever, in the DSM, because it's painting with broad strokes. Like, I mean, this is probably going to sound very politically incorrect, but I think it's true. I mean, when you're talking about someone on the spectrum who works and has a job and is verbal and in my case loves sarcasm versus somebody who's nonverbal is living in a group home. I mean, they may be on the same spectrum, but they are at two very different points on the continuum, and like to just compare them and say that, I mean, we're talking about two very different sets of circumstances to be addressed.
To clarify real quickly for everybody watching, the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual used by psychiatrists and other mental health professionals in order to ascribe a diagnosis went from its 4th edition to its 5th edition, and that officially kicked in just about 5 years ago. It's been a slow implementation. And in doing that, they moved from having Asperger's and autism as two separate diagnoses, and that was kind of it, to now having autism spectrum disorder, which covers a wide range of things, and like she's describing, it's an imperfect way of understanding and looking at it, but it also is meant to capture a greater number of people and to identify these people as being connected, and there is value in that as well. I remember when that change was first made, talking with professors and things, and they asked, are you comfortable with working from a spectrum point of view rather than like these discrete boxes? And, I just had to point out, I'm like going into the sex field. In sex, everything is on a spectrum or, is on this like broad range.
But I think along the spectrum, and to Julie's point, it may help some people to place labels along that spectrum to help mark, like mile markers of severity.
Yeah, and the DSM is put out by the American Psychiatric Association, I believe, and it is very political and very imperfect. It has a lot to do with insurance companies, with politicians, lobbyist groups. I mean,
we all know that the
medicine is not just medicine.
Yeah, transgender was only taken off as body dysphoria just in the last edition. So
yeah, I mean, homosexuality
was only taken.
Yeah, I was just going to say homosexuality is another fun example that was included in the 3rd edition and has been since taken out, but turns out not a mental disorder.
No, really? Say it ain't so.
Asexuality was only taken out in 2013. 2013. What I find real interesting is, like, a lot of the same people who are able to understand, being gay or being transgender or whatever. It's like if you say I'm asexual or I'm demisexual or I'm not thinking about it or it's not on my radar or just anything along those lines, you might as well be saying I don't eat or I don't breathe oxygen. I mean, I just can't believe it's that difficult for people to wrap their heads around. I mean,
right. Well, did you have any particular questions for us today?
No, I just wanted to share my story because I think it's important that people hear it. And a shout out to Matt Dillahunty. I was thrilled when he called in a couple of weeks ago and said, yes, don't forget the asexual people.
Yes.
I also just want to say real briefly, I've heard you saying people with autism, and that's fine as long as that's what's coming out of your mouth naturally. But if you're looking to say what most of us like, most of us would rather hear autistic people. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't care. Again, I don't care what people use as long as it's what's naturally coming out of their mouths. What bothers me is when people say people with autism because they've been told by neurotypical parents and teachers that that's what they're supposed to say. they're like, oh, we can't be ableist. We have to say people with autism. And it's like, guess what? That's exactly what you're doing if you're listening. You know, you're taking that advice from neurotypical people instead of those of us on the spectrum. And I've actually been told by neurotypical people, like, no, you have to do person first. Like, when they're knowing that I'm on the spectrum, it's like, no, actually, I don't.
Like, I can choose to identify how I want, and you can go shove it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I also like sarcasm, so.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Can confirm.
Yeah.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for your call. It was very insightful.
Thank you.
And we look forward to hearing from you again, hopefully.
Indeed. Keep up the show. It's a great show.
Hey, thanks so much.
All right. Well, a lot of stuff to unpack on that call.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I worry sometimes when folks talk about their sexual identity, and in this case, like a neurological identity, and you know, these different aspects. And it's important to remember that people are multifaceted. You know, nobody is just gay. Right. Nobody is just asexual, and these different things all kind of come together. And there's
it's an aspect, but it's not the whole person. Yeah,
and there's this temptation, I think, to simplify and maybe to cluster, to blame the asexuality or the demisexuality on the autism or these other things, and that's really not beneficial to anybody. It's not seeing anybody.
It's not helping anyone.
It's not helping anybody, and so it's really valuable to have somebody like Julie call in and remind us of that.